Good evening, everyone. Respected chair and all the participants present over here. I am Atika Hussain, a final year PG student at the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. And on behalf of the Raleigh Literary Society, I welcome you all to the National Interdisciplinary Online Students Conference on Trauma, Memory, and Post-Memory being organized under the aegis of the Raleigh Literary Festival. For the parallel session 8, centering around the theme of gender studies, we have with us Ms. Alisha Ibkar ma'am as our chair for this session. Ma'am hails from West Bengal and has completed her graduation from Aligarh Muslim University and her post-graduation from Jawaharlal Nehru University. During the course of her graduation, ma'am has received several awards. Ma'am has to her credit numerous esteemed awards, such as the University Gold Medal for securing the highest marks in English literature, Dr. Razia Khan Prize, Ms. Sabia Farooq Memorial Award, only to name a few. Ma'am was also awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship to pursue an MA in Applied Theatre from the Department of Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of Warwick, UK. Ma'am is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University, and is also the coordinator of the Aligarh chapter of the English Language Teachers Association of India. Ma'am, it's our absolute honor to have you here with us today, and we are looking forward to your valuable remarks and remarkable insights during the course of the session. Moving on, I'd like to introduce you to the rules of the session. Each participant will be given 10 plus 2 minutes for the paper presentation, followed by the remarks from the chair and an open question answer round from the audience. Now, with the permission of the chair, I'd like to invite our first presenter. Ma'am, shall we begin?
Yes, Atika, we can start with the session.
So our first presenter is Ms. Brinda from Sharda University, Noida, and her paper is entitled as Exploring the Impact of Insurgency on Women in Mizoram, a case study of Zorami, a redemption song.
Hello everyone, my name is Brenda, and my topic is further research is exploring the impact of insurgency on women in Mizoram through the case study of Zorami, a redemption song. I'll be sharing a presentation. Wait a minute. Is it visible to everyone? Hello?
Yes, it
Hello?
is.
Yes, it is visible.
The impact of insurgency on women in conflict-affected areas is a complex and often overlooked aspect of the armed conflicts. Women experiences unique challenges and vulnerabilities during the time of the uprising, yet their voices and experiences are frequently marginalized. The case study of Zarami, a redemption song, provides an opportunity to explore into the experiences of women in the context of Mizoram insurgency in Northeast India. This study aims to explore the multifaceted impact of insurgency on women in Mizoram, focusing on their experiences, challenges, resilience, and trauma, even in the aftermath of the insurgency. Moving on, we have the purpose. The purpose of the paper exploring the impact of insurgency on women in Mizoram through the case study of Zorami, a redemption song, is to generate the knowledge, raise awareness, and advocate for the rights of women affected by conflict. It strives to promote gender equality, empower women, and foster inclusive and sustainable development in Mizoram and also beyond. And then we have the objectives. The objective of the research study aims to provide a nuanced and understanding of the impacts of insurgency on women in Mizoram and shed light on the experiences, challenges, and resilience. It seeks to amplify the voices of women and contribute to the development of the uh, context specific interventions and policies that addresses their needs and concern. Uh, Moving on, we have the Mizoram insurgency, historical and contextual overview. Um, the Mizoram insurgency uh, refers to the prolonged period of armed conflict and insurgency that took place in the Indian state of Mizoram from the 1960s to the 1980s. The insurgency was led by the Mizo National Front, a political organization uh, which seek independence for the Mizo people from the state of Assam. The main causes of the insurgency can be traced back to the political, economic, and social grievances of the Mizo people, including the perceived neglect and exploitation by the central government during the Maotam famine, which uh, um, which happens uh, approximately every 50 years. Um, it is also known to be the root of the insurgency. And moving on to the novel, we Zaurami, a redemption song. Uh, the novel is an important piece of literature uh, of the Mizo society because it is the first English novel that has been published by a Mizo author. It was published in 2015 by Maswami Jacob. Uh, the novel highlights the hardships of women during the Mizo insurgency. The protagonist, Zorami, is a strong and resilient woman who faces many challenges and tragedies during the insurgency. The novel portrays the plight of women who were victims of sexual violence and rape by the Indian Army and the ways in which they had to navigate the traumatic aftermath of these experiences. Um, Moreover, the novel also delves into the complexities of Mizoram insurgency and how it has an impact on the Mizo society as a whole. It explores the themes of love, loss, identity, redemption, all through the lens of Zarami's personal journey. The novel is written in a poignant and evocative style, which makes it which makes it very compelling to read. The novel portrays the resilience of the Mizo people, especially women who were affected by the insurgency. Zarami's life shaped the Zarami's life is shaped by the political unrest and the constant fear of violence and oppression. She struggles to find her place in a society that is changing rapidly and is torn by the conflict. However, despite the challenges she faces, Zarami is determined to overcome them and find redemption. Her journey towards self-discovery and healing is a metaphor for the struggles of the Mizo people um, to rebuild their lives after the trauma of the insurgency. Uh, mm, the novel also explores the themes of identity, cultural heritage, and the relationship between the individual and the community. Zarami's journey her takes us through the different phases of her life, from her childhood in traditional Mizo village to her experiences in the city as a young woman. She is torn between her loyalty to her community and her desire for personal freedom and fulfillment. Uh, the novel provides us with an insightful portrayal of the Mizo insurgency and its impact on the lives of ordinary people. Um, the no the novel resonates the reader with different backgrounds and cultures, making it a valuable contribution to the world of literature. And the findings. Uh, the findings from the case study of Zarami, a redemption uh, provides us with valuable insights into the experiences, challenges, and resilience of women in conflicted areas, like we have mentioned. They underscore the importance of addressing gender dynamics, promoting women's empowerment.
Brinda, you have
Uh,
2 more minutes to sum up your presentation.
okay. They promoting women's empowerment and implementing gender responsive policies to support their recovery and foster inclusive and sustainable development. And going to the conclusion, the um, the case study provides us with a valuable insight into the experiences, like we have mentioned this. By exploring the impact of insurgency and of women in Mizoram through the case study, uh, we can eliminate the often marginalized experiences of women, um, and advocate for their empowerment, foster a deeper understanding of the gender dimensions of the conflict and social change. Thank you.
Thank you, Brinda. It was indeed an insightful presentation. Now I would like to invite ma'am to give her remarks on Brinda's paper.
Okay, Atika, I had a question here. So, do we also do questions after each paper or questions in the end and my remarks after each paper?
Ma'am, we are taking remarks and questions after each paper.
Okay. So, thank you, Brinda, for your presentation and
Mm.
for looking into the impact of insurgency on women in Mizoram. So, my comments here would be like I would like to know more about. I mean, I think it would be a comment as well as a short question for you. So you're talking about how the gender dynamics throughout are shifting. You talked about social change. You're talking about change in gender dynamics. You're talking about this impact, especially on women. So when we talk about the
Yes.
insurgency, of course, it is understood that it impacts all people, but you're specifically talking about the kind of impact it has on, let's say, women of Mizoram, and you're talking about how it is different from, or let's say you're talking about the nature of that impact on women, or let's say how from there we kind of move into talking about resilience of these women. So could you throw some light on, I mean, that nature of I mean, these, I mean, you talked about shifting gender dynamics or nature of that impact on women.
Um, can you please repeat your question, ma'am? It's not clear.
Okay, so we are talking about so So we are talking about the impact of insurgency on women, right, in your paper,
Yes,
in
yes.
Mizoram, right?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
what exactly is the nature of that impact or on women, or how does it differ from, or this gendered experience of the insurgency, how does it differ from that experienced by, let's say, men at the same time? How exactly? So
Yeah.
maybe delve a bit deeper into that aspect.
Oh, okay. Um. Uh. When we talk about insurgency, it's mainly about the conflict and all. Men are participating in the conflict. Like uh, there are many heroic tales of men
Right.
uh, during the insurgency, but women also have stories of their own, like which are worth researching and conveying. Um, Women were urged to send out their husbands and kids to the front lines, and after the men in the family are gone, women are expected to take care of the homes uh, and their family on their own with the scarce availability of resources that they have. Like they have to make a living. Even during that time, it was very hard for women because Mizoram, the state, the Mizoram itself was very poor during that time. So uh, it was a great challenge for women to take care of themselves, to take care of the family, their children. Uh, uh, during the times, the Indian army were using rape and violence against women as a political tool to scare the MNFs, the insurgents. Uh, they
Okay. Okay. Yes, I think that is, yeah, I think that, I mean, that is what takes the paper to, I think, a better direction, Brinda. Like when you're writing, especially when your title is, when you're talking about the impact of insurgency on women, specifically including what you have just said. So when we talk about trauma of, let's say, the insurgency on women, we kind of, it will make it even better if you can specifically talk about, let's say, psychological or physiological, economic, social, political,
uh,
and you can kind of define these kind of impacts and I mean on women. So I think that will give more, bring
uh,
more to the paper. Yeah.
yeah. Zaurami, I will talk about Zaurami, the protagonist of the novel. She the novel shows us since she was of a young age to the time till she get married, and when she was 13 years old, she was being raped by by an Indian army, and which she wasn't able to talk about to anyone. Like
Yeah.
uh she wasn't able to tell her mother because um um how will I
No, no, I do
be,
understand that. So that is what I'm kind of like, this would be my kind of advice for, again, I mean, when you kind of write this paper or structure this paper that you have just presented, because we are specifically looking at the impact, I mean, the nature of impact on women specifically, it would help if you kind of look into the impact on women, not only, psychophysiologically, but also
yeah,
socially, culturally, and politically. So that would kind of give,
okay,
I think, yeah, 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 yeah. But yeah,
thank you.
thank you for bringing this idea, this paper to us, and kind of familiarizing all of us here with stories, and again from the insurgency in Mizoram. Thank you, Brinda.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hmm.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable remarks. We'll now move on to the second presenter. The next paper is by Kanza Danish from Jamia Millia Islamia. Her paper is entitled as Trauma, Memory and Post-Memory, a Gendered Perspective.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Kanza.
So today I'll be presenting on the gendered perspective of trauma, memory, and post-memory. So trauma is an experience that leaves a lasting imprint on an individual's life. It takes various forms from physical violence to systemic oppression, and its effects are deeply personal and collective. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that trauma is experienced differently based on one's gender. Women and marginalized gender often face unique forms of trauma, such as gender-based violence and discrimination, and can disrupt memory processes, leading to fragmented selves. Gender influences the way in which one remembers and forgets, with social constructs of masculinity and femininity shaping memory strategies and narratives. By understanding the gender dimension of memory, we can gain deeper insights into how trauma has the potential to extend its impact beyond the individual, affecting subsequent generations. Post-memory refers to the transmission of trauma across generations who did not directly experience the trauma themselves. It plays a significant role in the dynamics of post-memory, with maternal lines often carrying and transmitting family narratives and collective memory. However, the role of fathers and male figures should not be overlooked, as intergenerational trauma and memory transcend gender lines. Examining trauma, memory, and post-memory from a gendered perspective is of great importance for several reasons. Firstly, it recognizes the complex ways in which gender shapes experiences and responses, and provides insight to the unique challenges faced by individuals of different genders. Men, women, and individuals with diverse gender identities often experience trauma in different ways due to the influence of societal expectations, gender roles, and power dynamics. Examining trauma through a gendered lens us allows us to gain an understanding of how the traumatic experiences are different based on the gender of the individual. Firstly, it is important to recognize the societal expectation and gender roles and how they influence the type of traumas that an individual is likely to experience. For example, women may be disproportionately affected by gender-based violence such as domestic violence, sexual assault, and harassment. These traumatic experiences are often rooted in power imbalances and reinforce harmful gender norms. Men, on the other hand, may be more susceptible to traumas associated with societal expectations of masculinity, such as combat related trauma, workplace accidents, or the pressure to suppress emotions. Furthermore, the way trauma is experienced can be influenced by gender factors. Societal expectations may shape individuals' reactions, coping mechanisms, and willingness to seek support. Traditional gender norms often discourage men from expressing vulnerability or seeking help, which can hinder the recovery and increase the risk of developing long-term psychological difficulties. Women, on the other hand, face unique challenges in reporting and addressing trauma due to societal disbelief, victim blaming, or the pressure to remain silent. The power dynamics of gender also play a significant role in the experience and aftermath of trauma. Patriarchal structures can contribute to the perpetuation of trauma as well as hinder survivors' access to justice, support, and resources. Power differentials between gender can affect the likelihood of experiencing trauma, the severity of trauma, and the ability to recover. For example, individuals who belong to marginalized gender identities, such as transgender individuals or non-binary people, may face additional challenges and vulnerability due to discrimination and social marginalization. When examining trauma through an intersectional lens, we also recognize that individuals who hold multiple marginalized identities may face unique challenges and vulnerabilities. For example, a woman who belongs to, let's say, a scheduled caste community will face uh, uh, will face additional trauma because of the experiences that they have experienced. So the intersection of racism and sexism can result in specific forms of violence and discrimination that are different for upper caste women and men who belong, and like men in general and men of upper caste society. The intersectional experiences can lead to compounded trauma, which manifest in different forms, emotional and psychological impacts. Sexuality also plays a significant role in experience of trauma. these experiences have distinct effects on mental health and well-being. It is essential to understand how gender and sexuality intersect to address the needs of the survivors. Additionally, when we talk about the intersectionality, we also have to talk about gendered minorities who have disabilities. So disabled individuals have a higher risk of experiencing various forms of violence, which includes neglect and institutional violence. Disability-related trauma can result from ableism, lack of accessibility, and societal exclusion. It is crucial to understand the unique challenges faced by disabled individuals from gender minorities and ensuring inclusive support services. The transmission of trauma to a child through mother. So right now we're proceeding to the transmission of like the post-memory part, where maternal and paternal lines, how maternal and paternal lines influence the trauma, and it is inherited in the upcoming generations. So the transmission of trauma to a child through mother is one potential pathway for intergenerational trauma. Maternal transmission refers to the transfer of trauma-related impacts from a mother who has experienced trauma to her child. A mother's mental health significantly influences her interactions with her child. It can affect her ability to provide nurturing and secure attachment to her child. Maternal distress can impact the child's emotional well-being and may contribute to transmission of trauma-related symptoms. It can affect a mother's parenting style and caregiving behavior. For example, mothers who have experienced trauma may have difficulty regulating their emotions and forming secure attachments with their children. These parenting patterns can impact the child's sense of safety, emotional regulation, social development, and it perpetuates the transmission of trauma in the next generation. So moving on to the paternal lines of how trauma is transmitted. So paternal transmission of trauma impacts a child when, yeah, there has been significant work done on maternal transmission of trauma, but there hasn't been much work done on paternal transmission, but the field is still under research and there is new work going on. So children usually learn and observe and imitate their father's behavior and coping mechanisms. If fathers who have experienced...
Hamza, you have 2 more minutes to conclude your paper.
All right. So yeah, if fathers who have experienced trauma display maladaptive coping strategies, and modeling of such behaviors can influence the child's own way of responding to stress or trauma-related triggers. The quality of attachment bond between father and the children plays an important role in the child's emotional well-being. Next, we talk about the politics of gendered memory. The politics of gendered memory refers to the ways in which memory, particularly collective memory, is shaped by power dynamics, social hierarchies, and gendered perspectives. Memory is not a neutral or objective reflection of the past, but rather a socially constructed and contested process that reflects the interests, values, and narratives of those in positions of power. It is often influenced by political and social agendas, resulting in selective remembering and forgetting of certain events, experiences, or voices. Dominant groups or institutions may prioritize the narratives that align with their interests while marginalizing or erasing the memories of historically oppressed or marginalized groups, including women and gender minorities. This can perpetuate power imbalances and reinforce existing social hierarchies. Women's experience contributions and perspectives have historically been marginalized or excluded from social or dominant historical narratives. Women's voices and stories have been overlooked, minimized, or dismissed, contributing to the erasure of their experience and reinforcement of gender inequalities. The politics of memory plays an important role in perpetuating gender-based silencing and invisibility. Memory can be a powerful tool for social and political change, challenging dominant narratives and promoting gender equality. The politics of gendered memory intersects with social categories such as race, class, sexuality, and ability. Intersectional perspective highlight how gender interacts with other dimensions of identity, influencing the construction and interpretation of memory. It recognizes that memory is shaped by multiple power dynamics, and that the experience and memory of individuals with intersecting identities are often marginalized or erased to a greater extent. That's all from my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanza, for a remarkable presentation. I now request ma'am to provide her valuable remarks.
Thank you, Atika. Thank you, Kanza. Kanza, are you a student of psychology? Or are you a student of literature? Or do you have interests in...
Psychology is my minor. I'm majoring in sociology.
Oh, okay, okay. Very, very. I mean, I kind of thought so. And thank you for giving me that information. And it's a very, very interesting paper. I mean, obviously, when we talk about, and I mean, again, Kanza, thank you so much for that paper. It was very interesting to listen to you. And of course, when we talk about trauma, even though we are a different department of literature that's talking about trauma, we have to kind of look into how trauma is mostly thought of or talked about in clinical terms or in medical terms. Whenever we talk about, like your paper, you kind of, what was interesting was you kind of started from a very um, a very psychophysiological lens. You kind of talked about trauma and the effect of trauma on one's psyche, one's effect of trauma, and how it kind of moves from generation to generation. And from a very, if I may, psychophysiological lens, it was, I think, right after Atika kind of said there's 2 minutes. I mean, that is where your paper kind of turned into a more social and kind of political, looking at trauma into through a more social and political lens, and which I find is very, very interesting, because when we talk about trauma studies, we cannot talk about it without addressing this tension, especially when we talk about trauma through psychophysiological lens, or we kind of look at trauma through a psychophysiological lens, or when we look at trauma through a more cultural, more collective kind of, or more political lens. So something for you to think about, Kanza, is when we talk about trauma through a more psychological lens. Okay, because psychology, when we talk about psychology, essentially, psychology again is a study of individual behavior and kind of intrapsychic dynamics, right? But when we kind of look at trauma, I mean, it kind of clashes with the idea that trauma is collective. There's a phrase that you say, gendered memory, or when we talk about a gendered response to trauma. So is there a collective way we experience trauma as a community? Is there a collective way we experience trauma as a race? Is there a collective way that we experience and respond to trauma as a gender? So this is this tension that I kind of wanted to see in some of the papers which I have kind of been able to look into a paper. And I feel like, I mean, especially being a student of psychology and sociology, it's something that you should delve deeper into. Look into how we talk about trauma, or we kind of look into trauma as a mental disorder when we talk about PTSD, let's say. So if it's a mental disorder, it's located within you, within an individual. So then trauma becomes something that's a disorder within you. When we talk about trauma, let's say when we look at trauma through a sociological lens or through a political lens, we look at trauma as something that is a collective experience of a community, of a race, of a gender, who are victims of certain systemic oppression. So it's not located within the individual. It's not a disorder that's located within the individual, but it's something that has been perpetrated upon an individual, or it's kind of, they have been victims of certain oppression. So I believe like this should kind of give you some direction into how we can take this further, looking into trauma in these two different ways. That would be it for me, Atika and Kanza. Yeah.
Thank you for your remarks, ma'am. It's still a working paper and there's still a lot to be done on it. So I'm still going ahead because I'm working for on other projects as well. So I couldn't invest much into this, but this was just a short gist of what I had in my mind. So
Oh, yeah, it was lovely listening to you. Just like some things that you can kind of, again, like, some threads that you can follow later. Yeah.
Thank you for your insightful remarks, ma'am. The session is now open for the question answer round. So we'll take questions from the audiences, if any.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. So my question is, that how do men react towards various forms of violence against women when it comes to their involvement in any of these cases?
Could you repeat what you said after when environment?
So I'll repeat my question. How do men react towards various forms of violence against women when it comes to their involvement in any of these cases?
The reaction of a man when they're directly or indirectly involved, it really depends whether, you know, how they have been conditioned to deal with situations. um I don't really have in-depth answer, but yeah, I think that's all from my end. I'm sorry, I'll look into it.
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohan. Thank you, Kanza. I now invite our third presenter for this session, Ms. Latika. She's from B.R. Ambedkar University, and her paper is entitled as Patriarchal Associations and Suffering, Mirabai and Piro Prema's Contemporary Collective Memory.
Thank you very much, Atika. I'll be sharing my PPT. Give me a minute, please. I hope it's visible. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so my paper is titled Patriarchal Associations and Suffering, Mirabai and Piro Preman's Contemporary Collective Memory. So before we get into this topic, it is important that we know what to expect from it. There are a total of 3 aims to explore, which are first, to examine how women saints, in this case Mirabai and Piro Preman, utilize the prevalent social archetypes to shape their desired identities. Second, how their legacies today define their subjectivity with respect to the men in their lives. And finally, we will be looking into the role of suffering in maintaining their collective memory. So given these, now let's get into the get to know some background. So the Bhakti movement played a very important role in creating their identities. Before talking more about the movement, I would like to talk about the period before that. So before Bhakti movement, worshipping gods was a public performance, only available to a particular upper caste strata of the society. They exclude women and the lower castes from accessing God. However, with the advent of the Bhakti movement, it became more accessible for everyone to access God, as God was now a personal deity who was readily available all the time. Women followed their Sri Dharma, which limited them to worship only their husbands and not even the God. In this sense, Mirabai and Piro Preman charted their own path of devotion to escape from the societal repression and make their individual identity. Now let's know who these women are. Mirabai is a medieval Rajput poet saint. Her very first mention in history comes from Nabhadas's Bhaktmal. Some of her bhajans are autobiographical that reflect the life-changing events of her life, such as the famous drinking of the poison. The famous story goes around Rana falling prey to some rumors of her having affairs and sent her the poison, which does not do any harm to her, and she is saved by Krishna. The other poet saint is Piro Preman. Not much is known about her. We just know that before joining the Gulab Dasi sect in Punjab, she was a prostitute in Lahore. She was also a Muslim. She found refuge by the Guru Gulab Das and became his disciple. A lot of skirmishes happened when she was inducted in the sect, as she was a prostitute and also was the Guru's consort, a place that she had always been aspiring for herself to get a respectable image and position in the society. So eventually, she is now regarded as the mother of the sect. All of these are known to us by her autobiographical narrative, Ikso Sat Kafia. It is important to understand the role of memory and autobiography that helped in constructing their desired roles in the society. Since we have a very less time, I would like to stick to the major points. Their narratives were riddled with miracles and mysticism, serving as a point of entry into the society in which they lived. The autobiography is important, as her book says. what autobiographical memory is always rooted in other people. It is important to note that they are often seen as a blend of fact and fiction influenced by the fallibility of memory. With this influence, we can assume that Mirabai and Piro Preman used the social archetypes available to them to appropriate their desired identities. And the next section will discuss that. So Bhakti provided them with an ability to exercise their agency and seek liberation. In this sense, Mirabai is a radical image as she challenged the Stri Dharma by leaving her house and husband and accepting Krishna as a lover. For this, she used the archetype of a gopi to provide herself the freedom of expressing love, as the gopis did. On the other hand, Piro, falling victim to atrocities inflicted by the brothel and the Islamic co-religionists and the sect where she was inducted, and had disputes over her entry. She was keen on appropriating her former low-caste Muslim prostitute identity by using the Sita archetype and purifying her image. In the incident when she was abducted, she used this archetype, addressing her guru as Ram and saving her, basically asking the guru to save her. This whole incident is very mythical, and it draws parallels to Sita's abduction. So they appropriated both the subjects here, Mirabai and Piro Preman. They appropriated their identities as a lover and a mother. But how do we know? But how do we know them today in relation to men? So to answer this question, I would like to say that women in Hinduism particularly have been known in relation to men. They have no identities beyond men. If a woman's husband dies, she needs to perform sati, as now her existence ceases to be present. She can now only become a goddess, a non-material form. In this sense, we know Meera as a lover, not only because she was a lover, but because Krishna is popularly known as a cow-herding notorious youth. The collective memory today that we have of them see this relationship through the position of Krishna and not of Meera. Similarly, Piro Preman became the mother figure not because that's what she wanted to be, but because that was available to her, as the guru was seen and still is seen like a paternal figure. Her identity today in the sect is appropriated as the mother goddess to the sect. Having said that, I would also like to talk about the idea of suffering, maintaining the collective memory today. So in Hinduism, suffering is a test of endurance and will. So it also entails this idea of karma. But since we do not have much time, I would like to stick to these two ideas. So it is suffering that made them what they are in this sense. And in contemporary times, Mahatma Gandhi glorified Meera's suffering and her endurance in context of protest and nationality during the freedom movement. While in the case of Piro Preman, what we have is her suffering as a low-caste Muslim woman, finding her place in the religious realms is what made her the righteous figure for her sect, and it was her radicalism obtained from suffering that she is known in the academia also. So here I end my presentation. Thank you. Any comments and questions are very welcomed.
Thank you, Latika, for a remarkable presentation. Ma'am, we request your remarks.
Yes. Am I on? Yeah. Thank you, Latika. May I know a little bit more about, I do not have many comments, but I'm very interested kind of in the idea that the paper that you have just presented. May I know a little bit more about something that you were talking about in the end of the paper, towards the end? When you're talking about, how we as a society, we kind of, there's this portion that you have also written in your abstract that I was kind of very intrigued with when I was reading it. You're talking about a collective memory as a form of myth making. So how are we kind of using this collective memory today? Like, you do talk about, so I mean, may you elaborate on that idea, and how are we kind of, how is our memory of, let's say, both of these women, Mirabai and Piro, and how is it kind of, how are we using the myths that we have kind of formed through those memories today, or what is it propagating in the society today? You were going into it towards the end of your presentation, but I think because of the lack of time, we couldn't
Yeah.
delve. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I believe this is a very interesting question, and I myself was wondering this. I think I can say that uh, society changes, and collective memory is always rooted in society, and society is always rooted in collective memory. We together make ideas and notions, and we keep changing them. So when it comes to myths, and when it comes to remembering somebody, we usually depend on tokens, and we usually depend on ideas that help us remember people, and that help us remember incidents specifically. So when it comes to myth making, these two are mythified as a lover and goddesses. Basically goddesses, not in the sense like the Durga, but in the sense like they're ascetics. They are the saints. So while talking about mythifying them, I just said that Mirabai was mythified. Basically, she was rejuvenated. She was a popular figure, but it was Mahatma Gandhi who rejuvenated her, and she was again brought back to the society, religious society, not just the religious society, but also the political notion that we had in those days during the freedom movement. And I hope I'm not deriving away from the question. And when it comes to Piro Preman, her idea is also mythified again, because now what we have in her sect is basically her as the mother. And very interestingly, she does not really find the same place as the guru does. The sect, there is this guy, I'm sorry to use the word this, there is this man, the priest, the head of the sect, who wrote a book on Piro Preman, and he basically purified her image as the mother of the sect, because she was the prostitute, and he does not really use this word prostitute. He uses the words that can purify her image. So when it comes to mythifying, he mythified her as the mother. And I believe that this mythification is basically making her the brand ambassador of the sect, because everything that goes on in the sect is all about the guru yet. There is a very small place that we find for herself, and I think this is it. I hope I was able to answer the question.
Atika, may I take a moment here? That's fine.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Latika, yes. I mean, so my suggestion to you here would be, because the last portion of your paper is something that's very, very interesting, and it can become another new paper, I think. So there's a potential there. So if you kind of look into this one idea that you did mention once, because we're talking about memory, primarily, you're saying that memory is a collective activity whose objective is to serve a social purpose, right? So what exactly is the memory, the collective memory that we have of Meera and Piro? We are talking about we remember them as a lover, we remember them as a mother, and we also associate the idea of suffering with it. The idea of suffering that's been associated with the identity of being a lover, the identity of being a mother. And that's the collective memory and the myth that is being kind of, not only we remember it, not only, I mean, we kind of know it as that, but we also kind of propagate that memory centuries after century. So can you kind of look into the social purpose of that, let's say? So what exactly is the idea, the idea of associating suffering with the identity of a lover, with the identity of a mother? And why do we remember it as that? And why do we keep propagating as that? And how does it keep getting propagated like that? So what does it do to the society? What does it do to the identities of a lover and a mother today in the society because of this collective memory that we have?
Thank you. This is a very interesting remark. I think I would definitely look into this and would take it further. I might have answer to this. I think I forgot to explained that earlier. I think it is because this archetype of the mother and the lover, this universal archetype, we have them in our families, we have them in our societies, and in religion also. We keep passing them on, and that's how suffering is related to this. Because as a lover, Mira suffered. The separation was there, and it is still there. This idea of separation is very important when it comes to loving somebody. And when it comes to, I think, a mother, the idea of suffering again is very important, because mother is all about suffering and this self-sacrificing.
Yeah. And that's
So
just kind of glorified, right? As a society, we also kind of glorify that kind of suffering, both in a lover and both in the mother. So I think you have a very interesting point here. Look into how that memory, how we kind of remember these identities, how we have been collectively remembering it for centuries, for generations, and like that, like we have been remembering lovers and mothers in association with suffering. So something that can be looked into in the future also.
okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Pratika, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any questions from the audiences?
Yes, I would like to ask a question. Latika, you said suffering and memory are universal traits of humanity, and here in your paper, memory and the concern of humanist studies coincide. So, can you please elaborate upon this statement of yours?
Can you repeat it once again?
Oh, you said suffering and memory are universal traits of humanity, and in your paper, like in your research work, memory and the concerns of humanist study coincide. So, can you please just elaborate upon a bit upon this statement, like how humanist studies, how is it related to humanist study?
I think it is related to humanist studies in the sense like memory and suffering. It is memories are made. Okay, so it is suffering that creates memory, that leaves a mark on somebody. So when it comes to humanist studies, when it comes to reading humanism, I think suffering and memory both play an important role, not just in creating the collective memory as such. I mean, it is when we suffer that we remember something, and suffering creates memories. In the sense like, I hope I'm able to answer this I don't know if I'm able to answer this very well, but my point here is that we do not remember happy memories as such, but we definitely remember suffering, how we suffered, how the bad memories were. So suffering and memory in this sense coincide, and they go hand in hand. Imagine having no suffering at all. If there's no suffering, there's no memory. So because happy memories, they just fade away. But when it comes to collective memories, we only remember the sufferings, especially when it comes to this post-colonial idea, post-war idea. It is just this violence and suffering that is commemorated and remembered. So I hope this answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. That is.
Thank you, Bushra. Moving on, I would now like to call upon our fourth presenter for this session, Ms. Ridhima Narayan. Her paper is entitled as Ethics of Remembrance, Revisiting FGM and Processing the Secret of Joy.
Hello, I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll be sharing my screen. Can someone please confirm whether it's visible or not?
Sure.
Is it?
Not as yet.
All right, just a second. Now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So my topic is ethics of remembrance, revisiting FGM in possessing the secret of joy. This is by Alice Walker. And I will like to start with my honor is not in my vagina. Why did you place your community's honor in a woman's vagina? Harm, no health. Female genital mutilation is classified into four major types. Type 1 is the partial or total removal of clitoral glands. Second one is a partial or total removal of clitoral glands with or without removal of the labia majora. The third one here is known as infibulation, which will be characterized in this novel particularly. This is the narrowing of the vaginal opening through the creation of a covering seal. The seal is formed by cutting and repositioning the labia minora or labia majora, sometimes through stitching with or without removal of the clitoral prepuce, clitoral hood, and glands. The fourth one is this includes all other harmful procedures to the female genitalia for known medical purposes. It could be pricking, it could be piercing, usually happens for ethnic reasons or for to continue with a ritual which was prevalent in a particular ethnicity. One is not born a woman but rather becomes a woman. This is a very famous saying and everyone knows it, but when we try to understand it particularly in context of till now, this thing remains to be true. So we have moved century apart, but nothing has really changed when it comes to a body of a woman or becoming a woman as a generic notion different from the sex which we are born with. Gender politics camouflaged by cultural norms and governed by patriarchal interests and manifested in cultural practices like female genital mutilation or FGM make the life of women difficult and burdensome. Tribal frenzy is very much prevalent when it comes to understanding the concept of FGM in a broader landscape or in a postmodernist life. One of the themes that runs throughout the novel that we're dealing with in this presentation is the concept of tribal frenzy. Tribal frenzy refers to the way in which members of a community can become caught up in a collective emotion of hysteria, leading them to act in ways that they might not otherwise. In the context of the novel, tribal frenzy is often associated with the practice of FGM. Power of tribal frenzy. Tashi's mother, who's the protagonist, Tashi is the protagonist of our novel here, and the Tashi's mother, for example, believes that FGM is necessary in order to prepare her daughter for marriage and to ensure her acceptance within the community. So this basically has nothing to do with the love of a mother for her daughter or how a woman should treat another woman. Tashi's father, on the other hand, does not believe in the process of FGM, but he does not really go against or oppose it. He complies with the wishes of the tribe. Tashi herself grows older. She begins to question the wisdom of FGM and to feel anger and resentment towards her family and her culture. Ultimately, Tashi decides to undergo a more extreme form of FGM known as infibulation, which was the third type of FGM, in order to demonstrate her loyalty to her tribe and to protect her younger sister from the same fate. However, the procedure leaves her physically and emotionally scarred, and she is unable to find peace or acceptance within her community. Another form of colonialism, this is something which I would like to talk about in this presentation, is how FGM as a process, when we are looking at it in the concept of or light of this collective memory or the things that we do for the community, how it becomes another form of colonialism. Tashi reflects cultural bondings and even goes for carving sacrificial tribal marks on her face that would make her identifiable forever as member of Olinkans, that her tribe. But she never knew that marks on her face would set her apart from the Western community. This happens when she moves abroad with her husband. Tashi's sister, Dura, died of bleeding during genital cutting, and the sight of blood leads Tashi to a traumatic state of panic. Genital mutilation reduces women's sexual satisfaction compared to those who had not been subjected to FGM, and this we also have to understand in the light of how Black women are particularly treated in their tribes and in their community, which people in the tribe wants to deprive them of the sexual pleasure as they consider it something as unholy. Decreased sexual desire and tapered sexual pleasure. Now, these are certain kind of images which I will like to share with you and which obviously might lead to certain feelings that you might be feeling now. And all these are very normal and people go through these things every day. Christina, the cutting from a clitoridectomy, partial to total removal of the clitoris to infibulations, removal of all the external genitalia. The practice of FGM gives high degree of torture and crucifying pain to women. Present research of WHO, this research is from 2 years back. I couldn't find the one more relevant to this by now. WHO claims that around 150 million women were subjected to this practice till now, and about 4 million women in the world are at risk every year of having it performed. This practice has wide-ranging physical and psychological effects, which not only created discrimination, but also cripples her physically and psychologically lifelong. So these are not some kind of short-term things which happen to women, but they have their lifelong impacts on them. Horizon of memory, how we can understand this in the light of memory. Anne Rigney warns against the tendency among memory scholars to focus on violence and victimhood. She argues to think critically about the cost of this apparently natural link between memory and trauma. Violence is the primary subject of collective memory and grievance the core of identity. I'll repeat the statement. Violence is the primary subject of collective memory and grievance is the core of identity. This is the quote from the book. I'll quote here. They have broken my wings. I see them lying crossed in a corner like discarded oars. Oh, and they are forcing something in one end of me, and from other they are busy pulling something out. Tashi's horrible ordeal at the time of the birth of a baby, Benny, is all the more awful and extremely complex as the obstetrician broke all instruments. She used scalpel, a pair of scissors, and severed cartilage. For no reason, I need to tell them that there was any of the hygiene issues or whether that was clean or not. And later on, instinctively, Tashi used her tongue to shape the baby's head properly. This tells about the state of mind in which Tashi was at that particular moment. And she dreams of herself trapped in a gigantic tower with broken wings. Her confinement in the tower symbolizes patriarchal enslavement and the cultural constraints which put her in a state of mental trauma. Adam, her husband, says she began to paint a chicken over and over on the larger and larger paper. She grew frenzied as the size of the paper had seemed to shrink in comparison to the monstrous bird she had in her mind. And the bird which was there in her mind was nothing but the trauma. While post-memory may allow to establish an imaginative connection with the memories of their ancestors and thus foster empathy, it is inherently more difficult for second-generation subjects to work through post-memory than it would be for them to work through traumatic events witnessed firsthand. Their distance from the scene of trauma results in their utter inability to ever experience and understand the horrors faced by the previous generation. When Dura died, Dura is a sister. In her childhood, she did not cry that time because African custom declared you must not cry. But now she mourns over her death. She wonders, now this act of mourning, when you are not supposed to cry, itself is a form of resistance as well as revolt. She wonders how Melissa, women herself who used to deliver all these type of FGMs in the village, did so much cruelty to all young girls of the village. She decided to murder Melissa, who kills Dura in order to take her revenge. She came back to Africa, and in the at the end of the novel, we also find that she actually kills her. Now, resistance is the secret of joy. This is the ending of the novel, and this is how the novel ends. Dying now does not frighten me. The execution is to take place where this government had executed so many others. The soccer field. I will refuse the blindfold so that I can see all directions. I will concentrate on the beauty of one blue hill in the distance, and for me, tomorrow will be eternity. Now, what is the power of narratives? As this novel is narrated by different
Ridhima, you have
characters.
two more minutes.
All right, I'll sum it. Post-memory is characterized by impossibility and exile from the site of memory. Both novels here offer opportunities. Both novels, the other one I was referring to, which I earlier wrote, was related to Chino Achebe, but then I removed it from the presentation. Component of the recovery process seem to present contradictory depictions of the possibility of recovery after destructive trauma. As Cathy Caruth, in her Trauma Exploration in Memories, that's the name of the book, said, to cure oneself, whether by drugs or telling of one's story or both, seems to many survivors to imply the giving up of an important reality or the dilution of a special truth into the reassuring terms of therapy. Psychic trauma involves intense personal suffering, but it also involves the recognition of realities that most of us have not begun to face. Thank you.
Thank you, Ridhima. It was indeed a thought-provoking presentation. I now invite remarks from ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Atika. Thank you, Ridhima. Again,
Thank you, ma'am.
is my voice echoing? Okay. So again, I think again what your paper does is something very interesting. Again, towards the end of it, I think it was perhaps the last slide where you have quoted something about a therapy session. So and what it kind of
Right,
does,
ma'am.
familiarity, yeah, when we talk about familiarity with social realities. So again, it kind of brings us back to, because again your papers, I mean, again I'll compare it with something that I think what was the second presenter's name?
Hello.
Kanza. Yeah. Am I audible?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, Ridhima, can you hear me? Should I go on?
Ma'am, I'm not being able to hear you. Is someone speaking something? Am I audible?
You are audible, Ridhima.
Yes.
Should I go on, Atika?
Hello.
Yes, Ridhima, can you hear us?
Just a
Yes, ma'am,
second.
you're
I'll
audible.
try to reconnect. Will that be okay if I try to reconnect?
Yeah, that's fine, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Just a second.
Ridhima, have you joined? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, she has joined.
But there again is the problem of audio. Ridhima, are you there? Can you hear me? Should we move on to the next paper or should I? Whatever you suggest, Atika.
Hello.
Ma'am,
Ridhima, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Now I can.
Okay. Okay.
There was a lot
So
of disturbance. I'm very sorry for this.
no problem. So again, I believe like your paper kind of looks into this tension between, how we look at trauma when it comes to trauma. Do we look at it as something that's more clinical? That's especially looking at trauma through a more clinical terminology, let's say, or through a more, if I may, psychophysiological terminology, or we kind of look at trauma as a collective experience, because you're talking about a collective memory also. You're talking about collective
Right,
memory
ma'am.
and how it
Right.
kind of passes on from generation to generation. And what it does is, especially the last quote that you
Right,
have
ma'am.
used, I want you to kind of, again, I mean, you must have looked into it, but I also want you to kind of look at it again in terms of this tension between looking at, let's say, tension between looking at trauma, tension that exists in trauma studies, let's say, when it comes to looking at trauma as something that's more psychophysiological or medical, and tension between that and looking at trauma as something that's more, let's say, social, cultural, something that's more political. Because again, when we kind of look at trauma through medical terms, especially when we talk about trauma and the language of therapy, let's say, it tries to locate a problem within the person. So it's a disorder that you have when you're struggling with trauma. If you're struggling with PTSD, it's a mental illness that you have. So it locates the problem within that individual, within often, and that individual is often the victim. But when we kind of look at trauma, I mean, and it kind of limits our understanding of how trauma is perpetrated, let's say, or how kind of people are victims of certain traumas. So on the other hand, even if you're in therapy, it kind of is important to understand the social realities associated with that trauma. It's not really a problem within an individual or an illness within an individual, but they're collectively remembering something that actually happened. Let's say if you're talking about FGM, it's like a memory of that FGM. It's a social reality that happened. They're victims of a certain practice system.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Yeah, so kind
Yes,
of
ma'am.
it's important when we look at trauma to kind of problematize its under. It's a very complicated word. Like I must again congratulate all the organizers who are here, because it's something that's very interesting when we look at trauma. And trauma is not only studied by, let's say, students of literature. It's studied, like, we have students of sociology, we have students of psychology, we also have people in medicine, medical colleges, people in dental colleges who are looking at trauma. How do they look at trauma, right? A doctor would say, if your hand breaks, they'll say there has been a trauma on the hand. It's a medical terminology that we have borrowed into social sciences, into literature. So, I mean, yes, again, a scope for you, Ridhima, to kind of explore that aspect a bit, explore that tension.
Right, ma'am. That is how we slowly move towards medical humanities. Like,
Yeah,
this is
yes,
very much a part of medical humanities, trauma.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
also, trauma never comes alone. It comes with the memory studies. So yeah,
Yeah,
both of these are very much associated with medical humanities.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for adding that term also, medical humanities. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ridhima. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you so much for your input.
Yeah, thank you.
We do have another question in the chat box. I'll read it out for you, Ridhima. In The Color
Sure.
Purple, how does the portrayal of trauma experienced by women challenge societal norms and highlight the intergenerational transmission of trauma?
All right. I'll not go into the details of The Color Purple, as this is one of the most popular texts, and we already know about the characters and how they feel individualized kind of trauma. Everyone in the novel reacts to the trauma in a different way. So we have Harpo, if I'm right with the name, because I read it long back. So if we have the character of Harpo, who feels that he is not to assert his masculinity, to come up in comparison with his father, who was unnamed in the novel. He afflicts the trauma onto his wife Sophia, and whereas we had the main lead of the protagonist with ourselves, and the protagonist does not really afflict the trauma or the violence onto another people to combat trauma, but she feels it. She goes through it. She goes through the movement of resistance. She understands it. She takes it in. It's more of a like the individual trauma that you take in, and then she was writing letters to her sister, which was more about telling and retelling of the trauma and the story and the experiences that we have, and how it ultimately becomes like a community who are sharing a certain kind of experience. So we had black women who were sharing a kind of experience. Then we had Sugar, who was going through the trauma being a black woman, but her trauma was not the same as the trauma that another characters in the novel were facing. And when we try to achieve or combat trauma, we have three things that we have to keep in mind. We have the wishes of the states, that is how the social thing comes into function. Then we have the validation, whether we have acknowledged the trauma that we are facing, our community is facing or not. And then there is the cathartic vehicle, which I, in the terms of Chimamanda, I'll call them as telling and retelling of your story till your community knows it, and then you feel the same feels. Even if we talk about our community in general, or we talk about Hindu mythology, let's call it, and we had Sati Pratha. And if we read about the books that were written in that period, and I go through character experiences or going through the Pratha altogether, I'm going to feel certain things, and it make me realize that when I'm talking to you, when I'm coming out of certain things as an individual now in 2023, there's a long lineage of trauma that is coming from behind, and it's not that easy, or it wasn't ever the same with the other gender. I hope I was able to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ridhima. We will now move on to our last presenter of the session, Ms. Srija Sarkar. Her
Excuse
paper
me.
is entitled as...
Hello.
Yes, please.
I had a question, but if we are running short of time, I will skip it. But I really wanted to know the answer to this question from Miss Videma.
Sorry, Afan, but we are running late on time.
Yes, I understand.
Thank you very much.
You can leave the question in the chat box. Maybe if I get it, I'll answer it there, if that's
Yes,
okay with
please.
you.
On to our last presenter of the session, Ms. Srija Sarkar. Her paper is entitled as Traumatic Memories and Gender.
Good evening to all. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I will be sharing my screen.
Yes, please.
Is my screen visible?
Not as yet.
Is it visible now?
No.
Can you confirm me once more?
Yes, now it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to talk about trauma and gender, its effects and after effects. My primary text in this presentation includes Alice Walker's novel The Color Purple, a short story written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman named The Yellow Wallpaper, and my secondary texts include Sylvia Plath's poem Lazy Lazarus and Toni Morrison's novel Beloveds. Now, how do we define trauma? Trauma can be defined as a stress or blow which affects the person's behavior and psyche in her mind. Trauma can manifest in both physical subjugation and mental abuse, where the victim undergoes through tremendous psychological strain so much that their memories sometimes become severely contorted. Sometimes the victim relives these memories through fragmented memories where the majority is lost, but whatever they remember continues to haunt them. Trauma studies was developed to examine the psychological consequences that arose after a person experienced immense trauma. Writers wrote about their experiences on paper. As we know, writing is an excellent medium to let out your own feelings, and also it really helps the readers to know about trauma, to know how to deal with it, and also to be educated enough to know how to sympathize with such sensitive affairs. Now, how is trauma linked with gender? Both men and women experience trauma, but women are sometimes more vulnerable to this misery because they are expected and sometimes forced to keep quiet about their suffering. Many are shamed and humiliated for speaking up. This humiliation comes from both society and their own families who repeatedly dismiss their voices. While some are silenced by force, many women choose to stay silent so that they could avoid the snarky remarks and judgments of society. Victim blaming is also quite common, where rather than helping the victim, they are looked down upon and blamed for what had occurred to them. A woman thus not only suffers while facing the trauma, but experiences the pain twice because of how her pain and she as a whole identity is dealt with. Celia, the main women protagonist of Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple, undergoes traumatic abuse in her very home where a young girl of her age is supposed to be safe. She is ill treated by her stepfather Alfonso, and then he threatens her to keep quiet. Out of desperation, Celia turns towards God and uses letter as a medium to communicate. This very act of writing letters is crucial as it depicts the voicelessness which she had. The readers also know why Celia was subjected to such violence, because Celia's own mother was ill. So Alfonso looked towards Celia as a mode of sexual gratification. Celia just became a body um, where Alfonso used, Celia became the medium which Alfonso used to quench her thirst, fulfill her sexual desire. Victim shaming is also a common practice in which Celia was referred to as spoiled twice, which further broke her self-confidence. Celia now, after undergoing through so much abuse, met Albert, whom she married. But Albert here as well never loved her. She simply became an object to fulfill his sexual thirst. It is also seen that a victim maintaining proximity with her perpetrator develops a higher traumatic aftershock than those who are away from their abusers. Celia, as she was married to her own abuser, she could not escape her brutal clutches. So now she had to undergo this trauma every day without any possible escape. The main person for whom Celia sacrificed everything, her mother, also didn't believe her. She labeled her as hysterical and a liar. This further isolated Celia and she went through isolation trauma. She felt alienated from everyone, including her own mother, and this was the reason why she believed that her existence meant nothing. Charlotte Perkins Gilman portrays a powerful example that trauma and its after effects are not necessarily a product of physical abuse, but can develop from an extreme mental pressure. In the yellow wallpaper, the narrator goes through an extreme mental pressure after being locked up in a nursery in the name of rest and cure treatment. However, when she faces terrible anxiety, her own husband John deems her restlessness as a mere fancy of her mind. She is then infantilized, which implies that a woman is being treated like a child and her opinions are being dismissed when necessarily her mental health and pleas of help should be addressed. So now, the narrator, without any human to validate her feelings, turns towards her journal, where she bared her heart and mind. The narrator, after going through isolation trauma, being infantilized and dismissed by her own husband, her anxiety worsens up and she begins to question her own sanity based on others' opinion. John, according to John, his wife's opinion are not worthy enough to be taken seriously. The narrator hence slowly started dissociating from her own self and completely became mad. Her mental stress of being ignored led her towards an imaginative self where she wasn't restricted, where she could be who she wants to be. She sympathized with an imaginary woman whom she believed like her was struck just uh, like her was struck behind the walls of her nursery. The narrator's trauma and isolation made her to believe that she is her and her is she. She completely transformed into a imaginary woman. She somewhat created an alter ego which helped her to escape the ignorance and lived in her freedom. Now, the partition of India in 1947 wreaked havoc upon the
Sanjay, you
life.
have two more minutes.
Okay. Wreaked havoc in everyone's life, including people living in both India and Pakistan. While riots and killings and religious hatred became a common means in everyone's life, women in particular became the vehicle where most grievous harms were inflicted. Be it a Hindu woman or a Muslim woman, many were raped and killed. Others were permanently separated from their families. They were snatched away from their original lives and lived in great despair and agony. Many were forced into sexual slavery and others lived as domestic servants. Some of these women were spared, but they too suffered humiliated when they were recovered. The children born out of these women also suffered consequences of trauma as they separated from their mother, had an motherless and loveless childhood. These women were forced up to give their own identities and hope of having a good future and were forced to live with their new identities settled elsewhere. The writer Sylvia Plath went through many traumas in her life, such as losing her father, whom she adored, a strained relationship with her mother, and marrying Ted Hughes, with whom she could never have a cordial relationship. Everything heavily weighed her mind, and that inspired most of her writing. In Lady Lazarus, we see she writes about a woman suffering from so much trauma and anxiety that she is on the verge of committing suicide. He draws upon the fact that trauma can lead a person to take extreme measures to end their pain. Toni Morrison, in her novel Beloved, mentions a side of trauma which is not usually talked about. She explains how the legacy of slavery and the subjugation of colonial masters were one of the main reasons why Black women faced tormentation for generations. These women could not escape the subjugation, and neither their children could. Seth was the main protagonist in this novel. She had to kill her own daughter, Beloved, in order to make sure she does not suffer the same fate what what her mother did. Seth, on the other hand, could not see her daughter suffering and being a slave like her. But after killing her own daughter, she went through the trauma of guilt and self-hatred. Women have suffered enough in silence and they have been made to believe that their opinions are subjected to nothing. Whether we take account of Celia in color purple or the narrator in yellow wallpaper, both belong from different ethnicities, have different ways of life, and live a completely different life from one another. But
Srija,
what
please
is common?
conclude.
Okay, but what is common in both of them is that they have undergone through several trauma which have affected their lives and also people living around them. Thank you.
Thank you, Srija.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Shrija. I think it was a very good paper to end the session with. Actually, it would have been a wonderful paper to begin the session with too, because it kind of gives us, I mean, familiarizes us with the idea of trauma studies in the beginning. So it kind of, like I said, frames the session well. Also, in towards the end of the paper, Shrija also gives us a very interesting, a little, I mean, I think a brief overview of all the women writers who have looked into trauma, who looked into memory, who looked into memory, post-memory trauma, and how trauma has kind of impacted women and their writings. So thank you for that, and I believe it will greatly benefit everybody who's there in the session. Take up different threads, especially from your presentation, Shrija,
Thank
and
you, ma'am.
look into all these writers, and especially post-partition writing in India. You have also talked about Toni Morrison. You have talked about so many different writers. So I think it kind of is a wonderful paper to end with. Yeah. And if I may take another, I mean, not even a minute, half a minute from Atika. Thank you, everyone who have presented your papers today. I think it's brilliant effort on all your part, especially all of you are beginners who are starting to write papers. And for all of you, I would think, like, I mean, the way you have structured your paper, it's quite interesting. The way you have taken up very, very important discussions in trauma studies. We had papers from psychology, from literature, sociology, papers that are looking into, again, the clashes between these two fields. So, I mean, huge congratulations to all of you, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading some of your works published in the future. Thank you.
With this, we come to an end of the session. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us today and sharing with us your valuable knowledge and your enlightening remarks. We indeed learned a lot during the session. Thank you to all the participants for your wonderful paper presentations, and to the audience for being patient listeners. I further request you all to join us for the concluding session, the link of which has been shared on the group.